was Alexander Hamilton who once said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Anybody other than me think old Alex was right? Yeah, I think he was on to something there. We've got to have values in our lives, things that are non-negotiables for us, right? Things that whenever the deal comes up, no matter how much money's in it, or no matter how cute she is, or no matter how cool it might make you, that you say, no, that's not me. That's not who I am, right? You need values in your life, and we need values in our church. Things that we hold on to, that we cling to, that go, no, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is how we operate. And so if you were here with us the end of October, I did a standalone message called Pursue What's Next. I don't know if you remember that, I don't know if you were here, but I promise that over the course of the next year, you'd begin to hear more standalone messages about the core values of our church. Things that we hold near and dear to our hearts, things that we cling to, things that are non-negotiables for us. So welcome to today. All right, you're in for it. We've got 4 values here at the church, and so whether you're in the room here or you're watching online today, I want to give you the 4 and then zoom in on the 1. Can we do that? You guys good for that? You ready? You don't look ready. Are you ready? Yeah, good. Okay. Here's the 4. We'll breeze through them very, very quickly. We are a people who live on mission, meaning that we join Jesus in reclaiming humanity. We don't just go on mission trips, we live on mission every single day, everywhere that we go, every single one of us. No matter if you're a pastor or a missionary or a human, you live on mission. This is something that God is asking each of us to carry. We're a people who team together. We choose to lead no matter what we're doing in a team, because there we find unity and wisdom and humility. We're a people who choose to go the second mile, and we hope that it becomes our second nature. What that really means is that we're going to serve others beyond what's expected. And we're going to zoom in on that one today. And lastly, you heard about pursue what's next. That means that we're going to embrace God's leading into the future. So if you've got your Bible today, go ahead, open with me Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. We're going to explore what it means to be second mile, second nature people. All right? You got your Bible? These are the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. You've heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Depending on your translation, it might say tunic and cloak, right? And verse 41. If anyone forces you, that word's going to be important for us, to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Jesus rounds out this section in verse 42, and he says, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. This morning, I'd like to speak to you from the subject, when good enough isn't good enough. This morning, I'd like to speak to you from the subject, when good enough isn't good enough. And I'd like to start with just doing a very, very simple 1-question survey. Everybody likes surveys, right? You guys like surveys? No? It's only 1 question. It's only 1 question. I think you're going to like it. 1 question. Think you're going to like it. When you catch on, you can just shout it out. This is an interactive section. 1 question. Here we go. I got to stand on this. I'm not tall enough. Dogs. Overwhelmingly, it's dogs. Overwhelmingly, cats or dogs. Dogs is always the answer. And I've got to tell you, I recently accidentally acquired 2 cats in which I'm slightly allergic to. And these cats are just like every other cat. They meow, they hiss, they walk like this, they're scared of water, and they climb trees. right? And it doesn't matter when I come home. I could come home and see them outside and they're climbing on the trees. Or like over the Christmas season, I've come home and repeatedly had to remove them from my Christmas tree, right? And they're cats, so they climb trees. It's what they do. They don't know that they're not supposed to climb my Christmas tree. And so I'm like laying under the tree trying to get the stupid cat down. Come here, cat, you come here. Stop climbing my tree. I've even seen memes floating around online of people who saran wrap their Christmas tree so their cat doesn't climb it, you know? And I can't stop the cats from climbing trees. It's what they do. It's who they are. It's actually become second nature to them. It's just what they do. Cats climb trees. So let me ask you, of the words that we just read in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 42, do any of those things that Jesus told us to do come naturally to you? I gotta admit, none of what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 42 comes naturally to me. Right? I mean, Tom, if I was to bring you up here and I was to slap you across the face, what would you do? Of course you would, right? Yeah. No, naturally, we're like, you're going to slap me, I'm going to slap you back. Oh, you're going to take my shirt? You're going to take my tunic? Oh, is my natural reaction going to be, you know what? While you're at it, if you want to sue me for my t-shirt, I'm going to give you my best coat as well. You know what? You can have this. You want anything else in my house? You can have any of these things. It doesn't come naturally to us. Somebody forces you to go 1 mile. They forced you to do it. Are you going to be like, you know what? Let's go 2. I'm up for another round. I don't have anything else to do. I'm up for some extra cardio today. I'm in. No, none of these things come naturally to us. Of course not. It's not our nature. As humans, we just don't naturally do these things. But it is the standard that Jesus has for us. See, this section of scripture actually comes from the Sermon on the Mount. It wasn't called the Sermon on the Mount originally. It's just a name that we've given it over time because he's on a mountain and there's people and he gave a sermon, a really long one that covers a bunch of different chapters in the book of Matthew. And the Sermon on the Mount is not intended to be salvific in nature, meaning that you do these things and you will earn salvation. You will get salvation. You will be saved by doing these things that I've taught you in this sermon. That's not what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. The Sermon on the Mount is actually teaching you about the ways that you now behave to show that you are saved. Right? The ways that you think, the ways that you operate to show that you're a Christian, that you're a follower of Jesus, that you found salvation in Jesus' name. And so that's what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. And one of the things we need to understand is that life with God is actually both horizontal and vertical. See, life with God is actually, it's personal because it's between me and God, and there's this kind of up and down, God's in heaven, I'm here. It's a vertical type relationship that I have. But I also have a horizontal relationship. That's the relationship I have with you, and you have with your brother, and you have with your wife, and you have with people at work, right? And you have with your, let's just call them enemies. I know none of you have enemies, but let's just say that. It's a horizontal relationship and a vertical relationship. That's what life with God is all about. And most of the Sermon on the Mount isn't about the vertical relationship. Most of the life with God taught in the Sermon on the Mount is about the horizontal. That's a really long word. The horizontal relationship, about how we interact with others. So at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, you probably remember this, Jesus goes into this long list of things called the Beatitudes. People have said, this is how your attitude should be, right? And then he goes on to say that you who are followers of Jesus, you are called to be salt and to be light. And then he goes into this little thing where he says, hey, I know there's the law that's out there and all the legal things, and you guys are trying to keep all the laws, but guess what? I'm the fulfillment of the law. And beyond that, he then goes into 6 statements where he addresses 6 different topics and says, you've heard it said, but I tell you this. What Jesus is meaning here in these 6 different sections is what you've heard the law tell you, what you've heard from the oral tradition that this is the way that the law is, I'm about to tell you something new because I am the fulfillment of the law. And so here in this section, Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, the beginning says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is actually a law that was written. The law was meant to limit the amount of revenge or justice that you could take out on somebody. So if Pastor Aaron chose to gouge out my eye, for instance, I could not come back and gouge out your eye and cut off your ear. Because that's just too much, right? But if I just wanted to gouge out your eye, that's totally cool, that's fair, that's right, that's the way it goes, that's the law, that's what everybody expected you to do. Right? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Somebody does something to you, do the same thing back to them. That's totally good. That's what's expected. That's the law. Fair game. But Jesus uses this thing here to give us a few different examples. You've heard it said this, but I tell you something totally different. And he gives us 3 examples. He says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, there's a lot in this, but we probably don't have time for all of it. Just quickly, if you are to slap someone across the face, let's just say you were going to do that, Mariah. Let's just say it, okay? And you went to slap them with your right hand because you're not supposed to use your left hand in public because it does detestable kind of things in that time, right? Because you're going to slap somebody with your right hand, that's what you do. You would actually slap them on what cheek? The left. You wouldn't actually slap them on the right cheek because that wouldn't kind of work. Right? You would have to slap them with the back of your hand on the right cheek. And according to the law in those days, you would actually be fined for slapping someone across the cheek. You would be fined a certain amount, but you would actually be fined double if you slapped them with the back of your hand. Why? Because slapping someone on the cheek is actually more of an insult than an injury. Right? He's not talking about getting physical revenge. You slap me, I'm going to slap you back. You bruise me, I'm going to bruise you. That's not at all what this is about. See, it's actually more about the insult, and how many of you guys know that insults sometimes last a lot longer than injury? The power of words can cut you deep. You can hold on to that for years. Bruise can go away in a week. And so really there's a whole lot here, but he says, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. What he's not saying is, if somebody punches you in the face, just keep letting them punch you. He's saying, move beyond the expectation, move beyond the law that exists. Do something different than what's expected of you. And then he goes on to the next example. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. See, the shirt, what he's talking about is the tunic. It was the undershirt that they would normally wear in that day. And the coat was the cloak. And according to law, you could sue someone for their tunic, and you could get their shirt and be like, Steve, I didn't need that shirt. You did me wrong, I'm going to sue you, give me your shirt, right? But you couldn't sue them for their coat. Because the coat was actually their protection. It was their blanket. It was what they used at night to sleep with, and it was the thing that would keep them warm and keep them alive. And so you could never actually sue someone for their coat or their cloak, if you'd like to call it. And every time I say cloak, I think cloak of invisibility. I don't even know what that is, but it's just in my mind. Can't get rid of it. That was for Pastor Joe. And so Jesus, again, is kind of like upping the game a little bit, saying like, you've got to do more than what other people expect of you. And then we get here, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. And I don't know if you can imagine in your mind being on the mountain that day when Jesus gives this sermon or not. But I feel like I can. I feel like the reaction of the people in that day, probably similar to my reaction when I read this and realize what Jesus is actually asking me to do. Come on, Jesus, you for real? That's a lot of work, man. But Jesus, I'm tired. But Jesus, I don't want to. But Jesus, that's not fair. But Jesus, that's not what they deserve. But Jesus, that's not what I deserve. But Jesus, I have rights. But Jesus, I've got the right to get even. But Jesus, 2 miles seems a little extreme. It's not even New Year's yet. I'm not even thinking about running. 2 miles? Nah, Jesus, I got something better to do. I'm not going to do that. See, I imagine that they're understanding and they're hearing this message for the first time. It's actually like kind of startling. You've heard it said this, but I'm telling you something completely different that is beyond what expected. Because each of these scenarios, Jesus is asking his followers to do more than what was expected of them. And to really understand this last part, going the second mile, you have to understand the cultural context which Jesus is teaching it. See, he's living in a Roman world. The Romans ruled this area at this time. And they took over for the Persians, and so they actually adopted some of the Persians' practices. And this idea of being forced to do something actually came from the Persians. The Persians, the royalty, the leaders, the officials, what would happen is if they needed something carried or they needed a message delivered, they could force or press your horse or your ship or you to come do something for the king or the royalty. Didn't matter what you were doing. Didn't matter what your schedule was. Didn't matter where your iPhone told you that you had to be. You had to do it. You were forced to do it. And so the Romans kind of took this over, and they acquired this practice where they would, the Roman soldiers, by law, were allowed to press you into service. And it was meant to kind of give the Roman soldiers a break, and when they pressed you into service, it meant that you had to carry all their stuff, all their armor, all their weapons. You had to carry their stuff 1 mile. This was the law in this world. And undoubtedly, Jesus' audience had been pressed into this thing. They had been in this scenario before where they were forced to carry a Roman soldier's weapons and armor and belongings and things for 1 mile. And there was a growing hatred towards this practice. There's a growing hatred towards Rome. There's a growing hatred towards soldiers. There's this growing hatred among the Jewish people. They're going, we hate this law. We hate this thing. It's super inconvenient. I'm about to go to my wife's, go have an anniversary dinner with my wife. I'm about to go to my son's fishing tournament. But now I got to do this. You're forcing me to do this. And so Jesus' audience, as soon as they're hearing this message, would be like, yeah, I've done that. I've been forced to do that. You're going to ask me to do more? No, Jesus, I'm out. Sorry, I'm not doing that. We actually see this practice in other places in the New Testament. In Mark chapter 15, verse 21, we read of Simon the Cyrene. And he's forced by the soldiers to carry someone's cross. You know whose cross he was forced to carry? Jesus. It says that Simon was coming back from the country, and as he was coming back from the country, I don't know what he was doing, I don't know what he was intending to do. He's coming back for a reason, for a purpose. He's probably tired, he's probably exhausted. And what do the Roman soldiers do? They just grab him and go, yep, we got a job for you to do, and now you have to do it. You have to carry this cross. So we see this practice in other places in the New Testament. See, Simon was forced to do it. He was demanded to do it. He was compelled to do it. He had to do it. So what is Jesus saying? What is Jesus saying to his original audience that day in the Sermon on the Mount? What is Jesus saying to us today? He's saying that it's time for us to make a deliberate decision to go above and beyond what is demanded or expected of us. Jesus is saying that my people should live looking to exceed the requirement. My people should live looking to go above and beyond their job description. They should never just do a little bit. They should never just do the bare minimum. This lesson was ingrained into my mind during my first youth pastor job. The founding pastor of the church was an old football coach, and he had just this thing for excellence. He grew the church from 0 to 20,000 something people, and I was a youth pastor of about 750 teenagers, and it was just like stuff going on all of the time. And he lived this excellence thing. He lived this value out. He taught this value, and somehow along the way I caught this value. Not that I get it perfect now, but that it's just always with me. He was just like, Every sign had to be perfect on the walls. Every environment, every room where we set up to do ministry had to have a right feel and a right look that felt welcoming for conversation, and that the ministry could take place, and that it just every room, every even storage closet to him had to be like perfect and spotless. He used to get like all giddy when the fire marshal would come through our building, and he would look in the storage closet, and the fire marshal would go, "These are the cleanest closets I've seen in the entire county. Why are they so clean?" He used to get all giddy and be like, "Yes, that's excellence." And the thing that kind of like stuck with me is that, man, I was never working for him, right? I was working for God, and God deserved my best. And so whatever I do, I should do it to the best of my ability. And so like, I didn't get his OCD-ness transferred into me, but I did get some of his thinking transferred into me. And so now every time that I go to do a project, every time I go to do some type of thing, and I get to the point where in my mind I go, yeah, it's good enough. I know it's not good enough. Every time I get to that place where, yeah, it's good enough, it'll be fine, I know that good enough isn't good enough, and I need to do just a little bit more. Because good enough isn't good enough. That's not the standard. That's not what it looks like to be a second mile type of person. And so whenever you get to that place where you're in your mind and you're going, yeah, it's good enough, maybe you just need to be reminded, no, I'm going to do a little bit more. It's not just the first mile, it's the second mile. Maybe I'm going to go a little bit more. Maybe I'm going to do a little bit more. And so now that this is kind of like pressed into me, I've got this mentality that all I have to do is not all that I'm going to do. Because good enough isn't good enough. Just getting by is not getting by. To glorify God in my life, I go beyond what is required and requested of me. And again, I'm not saying I nail this thing. I'm not saying I got this down pat. I'm saying this thinking has been downloaded into me, and I cannot get away from it. But does anybody else feel like kind of exhausted talking about this? Like it feels like kind of tiring, like, whew, really? All that? Wow. Whew. I don't know. And as I've thought about it over this last week, what I've realized is that many of us, like going the second mile seems daunting is because we haven't learned how to go the first mile yet. See, to many of us, it seems daunting, it seems exhausting because we've not learned how to go the first mile yet. Sometimes we like to avoid our responsibility or pass our responsibility. Many of us, we don't like to live by this motto, but we kind of do. We kind of oversell and we underdeliver. You've probably done this at work or at home or sometime where you're like, oh yeah, I'll get it to you by the end of the day. What happens? 5 o'clock rolls around and you didn't get it to him, you didn't email him, you didn't call him, you didn't, right? It's just kind of like you missed it. Or maybe, I hope this isn't too close to home, but sometimes we join a serving team around here and we're like, oh yeah, you know, I think I want to be on the serving team, and then we don't respond to emails, and then we don't show up to team time, and team time is actually a requirement to serve, and so you're like, oh, I'll just kind of slide in and get my job done 10 minutes before the thing starts because, you know, it'll be good enough. See, those things are first mile kind of things. Those are your responsibility. That's the expectation. That's the baseline. Like, that's first mile stuff. And if you can't figure out how to go first mile and carry out your responsibility and do that with excellence, you're never going to be able to go the second mile. And so I kind of think about it like this. If you can't go the first mile, you'll never be able to go the second mile. And if you can't go to the second mile, it will never become second nature to you. If you can't go one, there's no way you're going to go two. And if you're not going two, there's no way that will become second nature to you. And what I've observed in life is that there's actually two types of people. The first type of person I'm going to call a 1 miler. And the second type of person is a 2 miler. Maybe you're already trying to figure out which one you are, but you'll have time for that, so just hang with me here for a moment. See, a first miler type of person are those that settle for mediocrity and good enough. Second mile type of person are those who live to look a life of excellence, even when the boss isn't looking, because they know that good enough isn't good enough. And really, I want you to know that here's the good news. No matter which category you find yourself in today, there is good news because God's grace is sufficient. And around here, we applaud growth, not arrival. And so if you go, man, this is kind of the first time I'm hearing that, you're right, I'm not even a 1 miler, that's fine. You might be a half miler, right? And if you're a half miler, I'm here to applaud growth, right? The next step, because God's grace is sufficient. It covers us over and over and over again. The Bible tells us that God's grace and his mercy, they're new every single morning. And so if you're a half miler and you start progressing, you start growing, and you get to 1 mile, you know what I'm gonna do? If you're a 1 miler and you go, you know what? I do need to be a second miler kind of person. I do need to have that mentality. I do need to have that nature in my life. It's not just a value that I just think is cool. It's a value that Jesus taught, and it's a value that he's asking me to carry. And so, you know what? I'm going to work my way. I'm going to start to become a second miler. And then some of you go, yeah, I am kind of second miler, but it's inconsistent. You start moving toward consistency in that second mile, and bravo, because around here, we applaud growth, not arrival. Just keep moving, keep working. And soon enough, as you keep doing the second mile consistently in the way that you serve people, in the way that you think about people, in the way that you do things, it starts to become second nature, and you don't even start to think about it anymore. It just becomes who you are. And that really is my hope. That's my hope for each of us, that we continue to progress, that we continue to move. When I think through the scriptures, there was a man in the Old Testament by the name of Daniel. And Daniel, for me, is a great example of a second miler kind of mentality. He distinguished himself. He set himself apart from the rest of the group. He wasn't a perfectionist, but he was in pursuit of excellence. And it wasn't because of who he was or if he could get recognition. It was because of who he represented. He represented the God of all things. And so he served in every single way with excellence. He did more than what was expected of him. And so what he did privately, he was actually rewarded for publicly later on. When you look at the life of Daniel, you can't help but look at his life and go, wow, this guy just kind of served others beyond what was expected. He kind of went above the minimum requirement. He wasn't a bare minimum kind of guy. That's one of the things that I love about Daniel, and I love even when you look through the whole book and it looks that they're going, man, we're trying to find something, a charge that we can bring against Daniel, and we can't find anything. They couldn't even find the fact that he was like, oh yeah, I'll give that to you by 5, but then he never got it to him. Right? They couldn't find anything against him. He was a second mile kind of guy. And really when it comes to work or any other area of your life, here's what I've found out is that people who go the second mile are never the first to be laid off. People who go the second mile are never the first people to be laid off. This is just very practical teaching here for you today. They're never the first to be laid off. They're always first in line to be what? To be promoted. Yes, Chris, thank you. It's perfect. I found that second mile people always have job security. It's just who they go above and beyond. They serve people with excellence. Second mile becomes their second nature. But I've also found that you can go the second mile and still be wrong. See, it's what I've found in my own life. I don't know how many of you guys would know this to be true, but it matters how you go the second mile. You can do the right thing, and you can do it in the wrong way because you have the wrong attitude, and you're still wrong. See, how you do something actually matters a lot. I can remember back as a high schooler, I tried out for our soccer team at my high school. Surprise, tried out for the soccer team. And I was a freshman, and our team was good, but I was good, and I was a little cocky, and I knew it, and I wasn't afraid to tell other people that they weren't good, including my coach. And it got me in trouble a lot of times, just weird. And so I could do all the right things on the field. I could make the right decisions, the right passes. I could finish really well. My crosses could be good. I could defend well one-on-one. I could see the field. I could do all the things really, really well. I could do them all. I could do all the right things, but I had the wrong attitude. And you know what happened to me that year? All the coaches brought me together, and they go, you know what? We know that you should make the varsity team. We know that everybody expects you to make the varsity team, but you're not on the team because of your attitude. See, I did all the right things, but I did them in the wrong way, and so guess what? I was still wrong. And so the same is true when you start to go the second mile, and you start to do this at home. You start to serve your spouse, and all of a sudden your spouse is like, hey, honey, can you take out the trash? And you're like, of course, honey, I'll go the second mile. I can't believe she's making me take out the trash again. This is stupid. I can't believe this. And just grumble and complain and just doing all these kind of things. And it's like, hey, I am serving beyond what's expected, but I got a bad attitude about it. I could still be wrong in that scenario. I don't know if you can imagine yourself on the road with a Roman soldier and they press you into service and you go 1 mile and you carry all their stuff when they're not carrying anything. And by the way, they're the ones who are oppressing you and you're doing something kind for them. And you go the 1 mile and he looks at you and he's like, hey, the mile's over. And I can just imagine like my attitude. Oh, well, Jesus told me I'm supposed to go the 2nd mile, so here I go. I know my mile's over, but let's go, stupid soldier. I can't believe you're making me late for this again. Stinking inconvenient. This is ridiculous. You're not doing anything. I'm doing everything. I'm going the 2nd mile, Jesus, just like you asked me to do. But you don't even look at the guy. You don't shake his hand. You don't engage in conversation. You don't smile at him and just... You can do the right thing. You can go the 2nd mile. And you can still be wrong if you have the wrong attitude. See, it's actually your attitude that dictates whether what you're doing becomes a have to or a, you might know this, a get to. It's your attitude that actually dictates whatever that activity is as a have to, I have to do this, or it's a I get to do this. See, this is a major difference, and it's an internal posture, it's an internal thing, it's an internal attitude, it's an internal value that makes it different. Listen to this. I don't have to serve at church, I get to serve at church. I don't have to show up early and do that, I get to show up early and do that. I don't have to bless my neighbor today, I get to bless my neighbor today. I don't have to serve my King Jesus, I get to serve my King today and make him known. And I'm going to do it cheerfully, I'm going to do it with a good attitude, and I'm going to check my grumpiness at the door. Because I'm going to serve him cheerfully. I'm going to go the 2nd mile. And so around here, going the 2nd mile means that we're not going to do the bare minimum. This is an aspirational value for us. This is something that we aspire to. Not that we get it right. We don't get it right every single time. But as a church, this is what we aspire to. Not that we would do the bare minimum when we're setting up rooms and environments to minister to people. Not that we do the bare minimum when we're preparing a lesson or preparing a worship set or preparing artwork or preparing anything. That's not our heart. We don't want to do the bare minimum. It's our heart that excellence is to be expected. Right? When excellence is expected, then going the 2nd mile actually becomes second nature to each and every one of us who call fellowship home. Because that's just what we do. It's just who we are. Just like my cat climbs a tree, that's what he does. It's who he is. And excellence just becomes our standard. And so going the 2nd mile doesn't seem something that I have to do. It just seems something that I get to do. It's just how I operate. It's just the way that I live my life. It's just a value that I hold. It's just a non-negotiable in my life, in my business, in my marriage, in my friendships. I'm just a 2nd mile kind of person. I don't even think about it. It just starts to become second nature the more that you do this in a consistent way. And so I know some of you guys are starting to size yourselves up already, and some of us are feeling really good because we're feeling kind of like, you know what? I'm kind of here. This is my category. I'm a 2nd miler. Nailed it. Going into 2019, already done. Got it. And some of you guys are, yeah, 2nd mile, that's kind of lame. I'm kind of more like a 3rd mile or a 4th miler. Can I just give you a quick word of caution this morning? For those of us who kind of have this excellence thing in us that's just kind of like, it's just the way I roll, it's just how I operate, it's just what I do. The word of caution is that if you're not careful, you can start to become very, very, very judgmental. You can become very judgmental against these people who God is showing extreme grace to and is saying, hey, it's time to grow. You start calling people out instead of calling them up. Can you believe that she did that? I can't believe that. Can you believe that? I mean, you just start saying things that are just extremely judgmental. That's their responsibility. They didn't even do that. I can't even believe they don't do their work. How come they don't do their work? I'm pulling everybody's weight around here. I can't believe this. You start to point fingers, start judging other people, when really they're going, man, I'm growing. I'm becoming more like Jesus. I'm starting to grow. And you're just kind of It's just my word of caution. Take it, leave it, whatever you want to do. But then there's the rest of us who are kind of saying, yeah, I'm in this category, or maybe I'm in this category, the half-miler kind of category. That's kind of where I'm at today. And you're still asking the question, why would anyone give more than what's required of them? There's some of you, why would anybody want to do this? It sounds tiring. It sounds exhausting. Seriously, Jesus, this is not doesn't sound fun. Woohoo! Why would anybody want to do this? If you can again imagine a Roman soldier and mile 1 is over and he looks at you and says, you're done, but you keep walking. You keep walking. It's kind of unexpected, isn't it? They expected less and you gave them more. And the Roman soldier kind of leans over to you and they start asking you questions. Because the second mile, that's not natural to most people. Nobody does that. Start asking, hey man, I know we didn't talk much on that first mile, but who are you? Where are you from? Tell me about your family. You seem different than other people. What's with that? And they start to be changed and transformed on the inside. So why would anybody want to go the second mile? Well, it changes other people. It's a witness to who God is and what he's done in our life. And you know that you're a second miler when you start surprising people, and it surprises you that they're surprised. I'm going to say it all over again. You ready? You know that you're a second miler when you start surprising people, and they're like, well, that's unexpected. Why would you do that for me? And it surprises you that they're surprised. That's when you know that second miling has become second nature. It's like a guy in our church who just recently, a couple weeks ago, he overheard me on a Sunday that I had an early flight the next day. He's like, oh, you got an early flight? Barely even knows me. You got an early flight tomorrow? You got a ride? I'm like, oh, I'm going to call a cab probably. It's super early. No, I could take you. I don't really know you. Plus, you're going to have to get me at 4 a.m. It's early flight. And without blinking an eye, yeah, that's no problem. I can do that. I'm like, dude, are you for real? You live 20 minutes towards the airport. You got to backtrack. Then you got to take me to the airport? No, man. Don't. No, it's no sweat, really. I got this. No problem. I'd be happy to do it. It's my pleasure. I'm like, Chick-fil-A, my pleasure. You've been eating too much Christian chicken. That's what it is. But it started to surprise me. Like, he's going, no, it's not a big deal. Like, I'm surprised at his offer, right? I'm surprised at his offer. But when I'm like, why would you do, it's not surprising to him. He's like, oh, that's surprising. That's just what I do. This is how I operate. I just serve people beyond what's expected. That's just what I do. And so if you find yourself in that scenario, you know you're kind of in that zone where going the second mile has become second nature. But I also have to think about this scenario again, right? If you're on the street and the Roman soldier forces you to go 1 mile and he starts to be curious and he's asking you questions and it starts to change him and he's starting to want to know like what's going on in your world. There's also the other people that aren't privy to the inner workings of that conversation and what just happened. These people on the peripheral, the crowd of people. You know what the crowd of people start doing when you start to become a second miler? They kind of start snickering. They kind of start criticizing. Why are you doing that? You're messing it up for all of us. You think you're better than us? See, when you start to go the second mile, you just got to be ready for criticism. I'm just going to lay it out there for you. You ready? You got to be ready to handle the criticism. You better than us? What are you trying to do? You're messing it up for all of us. We only had to go 1 mile. Now they're going to start thinking that we should all go 2 miles and start all having a good attitude about it. I'm not doing that. And people will start to criticize. See, people will always try to tell you, they'll try to prove it to you, they'll try to show it to you, that going the second mile isn't worth it. But if you're going to be a second miler, you've got to have thick skin. You will always be criticized by people in mediocrity. Kids do this all the time, right? The moment that somebody starts having good grades at school and they start getting all straight A's, what do they start calling them? Oh, you're a nerd, man. Try to start tearing them down. Sometimes this happens in your workplace too, right? It's like they start succeeding and it's like, well, they're probably a brown nose. They're just such a suck up. I can't believe they're doing that. They just try to criticize and tear people down who go the second mile. And here's the truth. It's that excellence exposes mediocrity every single time. Your second mile exposes their first mile, and they will always try to get you to stop it. And if you find yourself criticizing second milers, you're likely a first miler. If you find yourself with that critical spirit towards people who are just going above and beyond, you're probably in that zone. But the good news is there's grace, right? We all keep growing. Doesn't mean that you're stuck there forever. It just means, you know what? That's where I'm at right now, and I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to keep following Jesus. I'm going to keep pressing into what he's asked me to do and where he's called me to go. See, first milers are usually the ones who hold on to their rights, they hold on to their opinions, and they feel entitled. And there really are two words that just don't go together, and it's the two words entitled Christian. They just don't go together. It's like fire and ice and oil and water. Entitled Christian, they're just two words that don't go together. See, last time that I checked, when I attached my life to Jesus, I gave up my rights, and Galatians 2:20 became true of my life, that I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I now live by faith in the Son of God who loves me and gave himself for me. See, the moment that I attached my life to Jesus, I gave up all my rights and my opinions and this idea that I'm entitled and I deserve this, because I realized that I deserve nothing, but he gave me everything. And that Jesus, who deserved everything, gave all that up for me. It's Philippians chapter 2 that reminds us that Jesus had rights that he gave up for the greater good for you and for me. Philippians chapter 2 says that Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. It was his sacrifice and his giving up of his rights that actually gave us a right. Do you know what that right is? John 1:12 tells us that our right is to become children of God. It says, yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. And this is actually what happened to me. I had a sin nature, but Christ gave me a new nature. And when I walk in my new nature, it starts to become second nature. And I don't act like I used to act, and I don't think like I used to think, and I'm not even thinking about it anymore. It just starts to come naturally in my life. See, he's a second mile kind of God. And Jesus, he just didn't come to just cover my sin temporarily. He came to erase my sin permanently. He didn't just come to give me forgiveness. He came to also set me free. He didn't just come to give me life. He came to give me life abundantly. He's an over and above and beyond kind of God. It's what he does. It's who he is. That's his nature. He's a second mile kind of God. And when you and I, when we drop our entitlement and our opinions and we pick up this value, we become like him. So why would anybody want to do more than what was required? Well, one, it changes others, but two, it changes us, and we start to be transformed into the likeness of our Savior. So here this morning, if you want your marriage to be better, go the second mile. If you're here this morning and you want that promotion at work, go the second mile. If you're here today and you go, man, I want my kids to talk to me and I want to have a better relationship with my kids, go the second mile. And if you want our church to have a deeper impact, we need to start going the second mile in everything. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where where someone has gone the second mile for you, but you just feel incredibly valued, incredibly loved. And a couple of years ago, Pastor Aaron and I were in India. And as we went to India, there was a group of people, our hosts, they just simply outdid themselves. There's a red carpet, a drum line, a rifle salute. They planted plants in our honor at their schools and these different things. And I'm kind of looking at Aaron, and he's kind of looking at me, and we're kind of looking at the rest of our team, and we're going, they did all this for us? What? You've got to be kidding. You got to have the wrong person. You're doing this for me? And I got to tell you, that picture has never gotten out of my mind. When it comes to serving others, when it comes to our families and our neighborhoods and our workplaces and our church, I want our church to be that type of place. A place where going the second mile just becomes our second nature, that kids and families would wander in off the streets and be like, I can't believe that you treat us like this. I can't believe, why would you do this for me? I dream of a day when that's true of your life, that everywhere you go, that you just kind of drip with excellence, that second mile becomes second nature for you, and then everybody who interacts with you, everybody who encounters you, everybody who deals with you, they're just going, why would you do that for me? And there really is only one answer. See, for those of us who only love because we've first been loved, we're like, well, if you're good enough for Jesus, then you're good enough for me. If you're valuable to Jesus, then you're valuable to me, and I've got to go above and beyond. I got to serve you beyond what's expected so that you start to see him. That you start to be changed by him. And that in the process, I'm changed. So this morning, I want to close with just prayers for two different groups of people. The first group, and I'm guessing this is probably most of us. First group is this: man, I want to be a second mile, second nature kind of person. I just need God's help, right? I don't always do this. I don't always get it right. That's the first group. I want to pray for you. And the second group might be, maybe you wandered in here today and you got drugged here by a friend or a family member, and you're hearing me talk about Jesus and what he's done for us, and maybe for the first time you're realizing, you know what? I do want to follow Jesus. I want my sin to be forgiven. I want to walk in this new nature. I want to start this new life with Jesus. I want to pray for you too. So just in a moment of quiet, could you guys bow your heads and close your eyes? If you're here today, first one, you say, you know what? I want to be a second mile kind of person. I want that to be my second nature. I just need help. Just simply raise your hand in the air. I want to pray for you. I want to pray that God would give you strength. I pray that the Spirit would empower you to live that way. I want to pray that it would be at the top of your mind. Yeah, all over the room. God, you see the hands, but more importantly, you see the hearts. You see the intention of their heart and their desire to serve you and to make you known. God, I pray right now that you would strengthen them. By the power of your Holy Spirit, that you would fill them up, God, that you would give them the self-control and the patience and the kindness and the goodness and the gentleness and all the things they need to be a second mile type of person. And here's the second prayer. If you're here and you say, you know what, I do want to follow Jesus. I want to make that decision for the first time in my life. If you're here today, just simply raise your hand in the air. I want to pray for you. Is there anybody here? Yep. In the middle there. Is there anybody else? You're going to attach your life to Jesus. Follow him all the days of your life. If you raised your hand, just simply begin to talk to God in your own words. Tell him that you want to follow him. Ask for his forgiveness. Admit that you've sinned and that you've done wrong, that you've gone your own way, but you want to follow him. You want to go his way. As you begin to pray those things in your own heart, the Bible promises that if you do that, to confess him as Lord and Savior of your life, that you will be saved. You'll be given a new nature, that you'll become a child of God. So God, I thank you for the hands that were raised. I pray that salvation would be theirs in abundance today, God. That this just wouldn't be an emotional response, Lord, but that this would be a lifelong decision. That they're choosing to follow you in the good and the bad, the ups and the downs, and the ugly and the beautiful pieces of life. God, would you come near to them? Would you bring godly people around them? Would you help them to get into your word and know what they believe, what they stand for? Lord, we thank you for this church. We thank you for the values you're asking us to hold, God. May we represent you well in everything that we do. You are a great God and most worthy of our praise. You are the reason that we serve others beyond what's expected. So we lift our voices to you now one last time. We declare that you are a great God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Church, can we stand together and sing this out one last time?